Hello, I'm Morag, and welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast. Join me each week in conversation with leading permaculture-related educators, thinkers, activists, farmers, authors, designers, and practitioners to explore the kind of thinking and action we need to navigate a positive and regenerative way forward to myceliate possibilities and share ideas of what a thriving one planet way of life could look like. My guests offer voices of clarity and common sense. It's November, and here in Australia, it's Urban Agriculture Month. Each week, I'm speaking with another amazing guest deeply involved in growing local food in and around our cities and towns. I'm speaking today with none other than Paul West, author, broadcaster, chef, surfer, and master grower, who you might remember from that famous TV show River Cottage. And he's now on a mission to help new growers experience the magic of delicious, fresh and organic homegrown food. Before we dive into the conversation, let me begin by acknowledging that I'm recording this episode from my hand-built solar-powered studio here in beautiful Gubbi Gubbi country, and I'm surrounded by my permaculture design gardens in a permaculture eco-village. The Sense Making the Changing World podcast is a project of the Permaculture Education Institute. We teach permaculture design, teaching and livelihood skills online to people on 6 continents who in turn localize and enrich it and find appropriate ways to apply the planet care ethics of earth care, people care and fair share wherever they are. I'd love to invite you to subscribe to Sense Making the Changing World on your favorite podcast app, to share it freely and also to leave us a 5-star review and a lovely comment, because it really does indeed help the bots to find this podcast. Alrighty, well, let's turn to this great chat with Paul West. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Paul. I absolutely love everything that you're doing, how you show up in so many different spaces and speak up for the planet, for gardening, for growing, and really, just being an inspiration, inviting people in to be part of this. I'm speaking to you up here from the beautiful lands of the Gubbi Gubbi and Jinnaburra, the land of the bunya. So I always got some bunya pines growing on in my garden. I was actually just down my little nature spot yesterday, and I saw these beautiful bird's nests hanging off at the bunya pine, and I took it because it had fallen down, and inside of it had this most amazing, it was like a cone shape hanging off the bunya pine, and inside was like all this fluff. And I thought, what a beautiful, beautiful home someone has crafted there. I think it's a little wren. Anyway, where are you calling in from today?
I'm from Jurunganj and Yuin country on the far south coast of New South Wales, the beautiful saltwater estuaries that dot the country south of Nowra. Really beautiful part of the world. A little bit, I'm in a southeast, like you're in a southeast there, Morag. Slightly different. We've got, so we've got the escarpment right behind us where the Monaro Plains come down to the coast. A lot of rugged national park, a lot of beautiful saltwater estuaries, and just a lot of good folk.
Yeah, there is around that part. And likewise up here too. I know something about when you're actually doing this kind of grow it local permaculture work, it kind of attracts good folk somehow. I sometimes feel like I walk around in a little bit of a bubble, always talking to amazing, wonderful people, because I guess when you talk about positive stuff, people respond with positive stuff, don't they?
Yeah,
it feels good.
And I think, and I'm going to give your listeners a bit of a language warning here, Morag, but growing food's a bit of a dickhead filter. I think that, like, if you're the kind of person that likes getting out in your backyard and planting trees and keeping bees and doing all those wonderful community things, growing vegetables, preserving, doing all those wonderful bits, then like chances are you're my people. I'm yet to meet a backyard food grower anyway that I don't like, Morag.
Yeah, I know. And there's a certain sense of like the reasons why people do it. How did you and growing meet? Like, where did that even begin?
Yeah, well, I think, because I've had the opportunity to talk about this a lot over the last decade as my passions kind of turned towards a public facing role. But I think that connection to growing food and to treasuring the piece of country that you tend and the community around you, I think all those things are really inherently human, that we're hardwired to want to have those things in our life. And that's why when people start along that journey, it starts to make so much sense, because deep down in the back of our brain somewhere, that's what's yearning. And being disconnected from that has only been a relatively recent modern phenomena where, even up until, the kind of World War II era, we were still didn't have supermarkets. Local food systems had to exist in order to provide food for communities. We were more connected in a face-to-face manner. And, I talked to my grandparents when they were still alive, but talking to my parents about their memories of their grandparents, and everyone grew food. They had to, unless you were super wealthy. They had to. They had lemon trees, they had chickens, they had vegetable patches. Chances are, if they were on a quarter-acre block, they had a sheep or a goat or something as well for meat. And so my personal connection, it wasn't instantaneous. I don't think it wasn't something that I grew up with in my family, but I certainly grew up in a rural area of New South Wales. So I was definitely connected and appreciative of wide open spaces and the kind of power and beauty of country. But the food growing piece came a fair bit later. It wasn't until I was 21 and I was traveling around Australia working on woofing farms, which I'm sure you're familiar, and as will many of your listeners be, Morag. But if you're not, woofing stands for Willing Workers on Organic Farms. And it's an international volunteer organization where you exchange 4 hours work for food and accommodation. And you may hear my kids in the background throughout this interview, so I'll try not to go angry dad and be like, shut up, you kids. But we homeschool, so this is just one of the realities of having kids at home. So it was on my very first woofing farm. I just won the woofing lottery. I mean, I've woofed on lots of amazing farms since, but this first one was just really like top tier woofing experience. And it was a wonderful old Frenchman who'd grown up in the villages around Lyon in France. And Lyon's Paris is kind of the cultural hub of France, but Lyon is that kind of food and gastronomy and small market hub of France, where we kind of think of those abundant daily markets and, farmers growing little diversified things and bringing their wares into a farmer's market every day. And he immigrated as a skilled tradesman to Australia decades ago and got himself a little patch of land in northern Tasmania and went about recreating some of that French countryside for himself. And he had 60 acres and he kept a milking cow and goats, and he had all these like hedgerows and fruit trees and vegetable gardens and geese and ducks and chickens and fruit trees, and we were hand digging wells. And, he was also a master tradesperson. So he hand built his house out of cob. He'd hand built all the timber fixtures in there, all the furniture he'd made as well. And it was just this really mind-blowing connection here. So I'd never experienced anything like this farm. And even though growing up rurally and, kind of hearing about farms like this in what I'd say almost fairy tales, I'd never had the lived experience. And I stayed with the gentleman went by the name of Gilles, and I stayed with him for a month, and the work was just so honest and connecting and nourishing. Like the work wasn't, you're meant to do 4 hours work woofing, but in the end, I was a 21-year-old young man. And so we'd just work together from sun up to sundown and stop for a long French lunch and then a light supper, and then go to bed at 8 o'clock and wake up and repeat again. And I found all these incredible like physiological and psychological changes happening in me about, when my body started to kind of sink and hum with that way of life, eating food that's grown on the property, sharing it as a part of a community, eating the food that you put your labor in to eat. And at 21, I didn't have a trade, I didn't have a degree, I didn't have anything. And, I was kind of that out there exploring the world, having grown up in a very small regional community, 900 people. And that just instantly resonated with me, that way of life. And I thought, as I was sitting there, I was like, this is the highest ideal that a human life can hope for. Like look at this gentleman. He's in his 60s. He's in incredible health. He's got family. He's got community. He's got all this life and country around him. He lives in a sustainable rhythm of existence. There's no stress, but there's hard work without stress. And I basically wanted to recreate a life like that for myself. So over the years, I connected with the permaculture movement and community gardens. And that was the kind of first port of call after having that experience on the woofing farm. I was lucky I had kind of a deflected gardening upbringing because my mother was is a really amazing ornamental gardener. But it was always just slave labor for me as a kid, moving giant piles of mulch, and nothing that I really enjoyed. But I'm now retrospectively deeply appreciative, because she set a really strong foundation for me to learn how to grow and to garden. And then after the gardening piece, I was doing a lot of volunteer work, still in my early 20s, not really with what you'd call a career or any sort of reliable income. So I took on the chef's trade, because I was washing dishes at a restaurant to pay my way, pay the rent, etc. And took that from one degree to the next, and ended up finishing my trade at what was Australia's best restaurant at the time, Vue de Monde down in Melbourne. And it was steeped in the French tradition, and the French tradition is steeped in agronomy and small farms and celebration of simple ingredients, and focusing on getting the best produce you can, and doing using a little bit of conscious technique to get the most out of it. So, and that's kind of completed the picture of how I got my foundation into this way of life.
Oh my gosh, that's an amazing story. I love that story, and there's so many threads that I want to pick up on, and I feel a resonance with it. There's that lived experience that you said. There's something that sparked you, something that you've not seen before. Like it opened your mind to that. Oh, there's another way. And I think this is a really important thing that, it's part of actually why I think community gardens are really important. I think it's why, opening up, demonstration gardens and possibilities where people, and woofing and volunteering is so important. Like, how can you open the doors and invite people in to say, come and try this out. This is amazing. I had, what do they call that? Tingles when you're talking about that experience, because I had a similar one in Ladakh, when living and working with the Ladakhi people up in the Himalayas, and where I just realized, oh my gosh, like this is it. Like, this is what living is really meant to be about. This is nourishing its whole. It's like you've got everything you need around you. It comes from the earth, goes back to the earth. There's community, there's music, there's food, there's all of that going on. And it was nothing really talked about money. It was about lifing.
Yeah, you're already rich. What's there to talk about with money? And what else could you possibly want more of in a situation like that?
What I thought was interesting too, that you mentioned that the first point of call after having that experience was going to something like permaculture and community gardens. And I did exactly the same as well. So, for people who are just touching into this and wanting to deepen their experience, I mean, we before we switched on record, we were talking about volunteering. And I think, maybe this is something, isn't it? Like, to really reach into the volunteerism and find what makes your heart sing.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a fantastic opportunity to have those experiences without, going and committing to a lifestyle that you don't actually have any experience yet. Because, as a part of, and I'm sure we'll get to River Cottage, and dive into that a little bit later. But as a part of the travel that I did when that program was on air, meeting so many people going, oh, we love the program, would love to do it one day when we save all our money and buy a block of land. And I'd always ask
retire.
Them, retire. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like the worst retirement plan ever. It's I'm like, and I'd always ask them, what are you doing now? Where do you live now? And what in that lifestyle are you doing now? And they'd be like, oh, we just live in suburbia and there's not really much we can do. And I'd be like, well, that's wrong. Like, you can live that life now, really, or 9/10 of it anyway. You might not be able to keep a milking cow in suburbia, but there's still plenty of things you can do to connect to the food that you eat, the community around you, and your own health and well-being. And I think community gardening is just such a wonderful way, especially if you're new to gardening, to engage with that, because gardeners are so generous with their knowledge. And that's something that I've come to appreciate over the years, that there's something about that process of growing food where you're able to shift from our kind of societal scarcity mindset where there's not enough time, not enough money, not enough, anything for anyone. And when really that's not the case. And that's a kind of a mindset that's a result of our modern lives. Whereas once you start growing food, you start to get that abundance and growth kind of mindset where you're growing things and all of a sudden you've got heaps of something, way more than one person could ever possibly consume. And I mean, anyone who's grown more than 2 zucchini plants in a season will appreciate just how abundant gardens can be. And I find that when that's your experience and you're growing things and you've got surplus, you're the same with your knowledge. You're not trying to secretly guard your techniques and your methods and your decades of hard-won knowledge and experience. Any gardener that I've ever met who's a really experienced gardener, if they meet someone that's just starting out on their journey, they just like latch onto them and just fill their unprepared brains with so much depth of knowledge and support, because every gardener wants to see more people growing food. No one wants to go, I think we've got enough food growers now. I think we've got enough backyard gardeners. Actually, there's only so many spots available at the gardening circle. So where it's just the total opposite. And so if you're feeling, because obviously taking on new challenges, getting out of your comfort zone can be a big step for a lot of people, and something that we don't necessarily do a lot of in our lives. But you can feel rest assured that stepping into the gardening space is going to be something that, you're going to be really welcomed and supported. It's not like walking into some like new boxing gym, where it might be a little bit intimidating, where there's a bunch of like muscly tattooed guys banging away on boxing bag stick glaring at you. It'll be the total opposite. Someone will ask you if you want a cup of tea. Someone will ask you if you want a slice of cake, and they'll start chewing your ear off, and you'll probably end up with a basket full of produce, cuttings, and wisdom.
Yeah, I was involved in getting Northey Street City Farm set up in Brisbane. And even before we had any resources there, we had a little billy in the middle of the park at the City Farm, and it was always on. And if anyone walked through, the cuppa came out. We took it in turns to be the person in the middle, to be the welcome person, say, "Oh, what are you interested in? How can we draw you in?" And there's someone over here doing seedling. There's someone over there doing food for us. They're doing bush foods. You want to find, there's always that linking thing and connecting. But I think one of the best things is not really also trying to tell people, but what do you know?
Yeah.
What's the bit of what is the bit of information that you've got that, that your grandmother told you or that you've learned along the way? Because, that's one of the biggest learning places. Like the University of Gardening is the community garden. I reckon, it's where you get to hear all the stories and side by side with people. It's just amazing learning.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, Morag. And it's something that I think is undervalued in our society today, where we're in this kind of competitive society, and the kind of winning candidate is the one that's only really valued, or the highest performer, the highest achiever are the ones that we tend to put on a pedestal in our society. Whereas in any traditional society, every person had a role. Every single person was welcomed, appreciated, and the community, the village knew their strengths, and everyone was allowed to have their voice as a part of that communal existence. And I feel like that's something that in a lot of spaces in our contemporary society is wanting now. But when it comes to volunteer organizations and community gardens, I mean, everyone has got something to bring to the table. And even if you feel like you've never gardened, so, I mean, what on earth could you bring to the table at community gardens? Community gardens are organizations. They've got compliance, they've got AGMs, they've got things that need to be done, and so there's always something. Like, you must have some skill in your repertoire, some practiced life skill. You might be good at playing violin. Why don't you play a bit of violin at the community workshop days and entertain everyone? Add some like magic and beauty to the situation. Or you might be a beautiful artist, or you might be an accountant or a web designer, or there's anything. Really, there's something for anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, you don't have to be a gardener. If gardening is your least skill and you want to learn, then come in and offer. That's exactly right. Absolutely.
Yes.
I'd love to hear from you. How did you get from being a woofer with a Frenchman to your work as a public presenter and a public face and an author, someone who's sharing it out across the country and across the world?
I think the big catalyst for that change was when I had the opportunity to be the host of River Cottage Australia, Morag, and that I'd finished my culinary trade, working in fine dining at the very, very kind of top pointy end, and realized that was really the antithesis of the lifestyle. I appreciated the skills that I learned, but the lifestyle was, it's a very metropolitan, urban CBD, 90-hour weeks inside for all of those, like unsustainable physically, psychologically, emotionally, community. And so kind of did the trade and then got out of there as fast as I could and went to kind of reconnect with what I was passionate about, which was this, this lifestyle of food and gardening as a holistic picture. And so my now wife and I now then moved down to Hobart because we had some good friends down there and we'd always loved our time down there. And so we moved to Tasmania back in, I'm going to say 2008 to kind of start realizing that dream for ourselves. We were both in hospitality, so we're still working, but we were growing food in our backyard and keeping chickens and keeping fruit trees with the kind of goal of one day being on a slightly larger block of land. We lived on a little sandy block of 800 square meters down the South Arm Peninsula, but for a young hospitality couple in their 20s, it was all we could achieve. And we were grateful for it and we made the most of it. But then, the opportunity to host River Cottage Australia came up, and that took me and us back to the south coast, or to the south coast of New South Wales, where I live now. So I was a massive fan already of the UK River Cottage franchise or series, and a big fan of the work of Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, because it was the first time I'd seen that experience that I had on that woofing farm all those years ago articulated on a television screen. I'd read about it in magazines and books and out in the world, but I'd never seen it presented on TV. And so I knew the concept of the program and loved it. And so when, the opportunity to host the Australian one came up, I was a little bit reluctant at first to go for it, but then did. And really there was no looking back. I was put onto a farm on the south coast of New South Wales and, kind of built it up from scratch over the course of 4 seasons, three and a bit years. And that show came to its, natural conclusion in just at the beginning of 2016. And then after that, I guess no one really anticipated how enduringly popular it would be. And that is because of the values and the lifestyle that it celebrates. And there's all too rare to have celebratory television now, unfortunately, where it painted a really positive picture for life on the land, on a hobby farm in rural Australia. And I think that continues to resonate with people because it's just got such a good heart. And as a result of that continued enthusiasm for the River Cottage program, I was able to, continue speaking about those passions and ideals. After River Cottage, my family and I, we moved into a more urban environment. And it was kind of a way of me putting my money where my mouth was, because I just spent years telling people that they don't have to live on 20 acres to be able to live a, inverted commas, River Cottage style life. I decided to move the family into a really kind of hardcore urban environment with a rental property and see if I can still live by those values that we did with River Cottage. And so we moved into Thornbury in the inner north of Melbourne because my wife's from Melbourne. So it was a great opportunity to reconnect with her family and friends. And it was just sensational. It was so good. I mean, there's pros and cons to wherever you are, no doubt, but we really found that in the urban environment, there was so much you could do. There was so much waste stream that could be repurposed as resource. There was this real kind of vibe of people growing food and connecting, and all this amazing kind of community interconnectedness that happened, and all these amazing creative people and initiatives. And so ever since then, my focus has really been on celebrating people growing food in their backyards, because it's something that anyone can do. Even though I use the term backyard, you don't even need a backyard. You can have a sunny windowsill, you can have a balcony, you can have a verge, you can have a courtyard, or you can have a little plot in a community garden. I mean, even if you're living in a windowless apartment in the middle of the city, there are still ways that you can connect with growing your own food. And that's where most of us live in Australia. We've got some real sentiment around life in regional Australia. We still think of ourselves as like a nation of country people out there and wide open spaces. But the reality is we're one of the most urbanized societies on earth. So I figured, well, I don't want to continue selling people a dream of aspiration like River Cottage was, as celebratory as it was. For most people, it wasn't their reality. And so now I'm really in that space of getting people to connect with their immediate community in the suburban and urban environment, and not think about things from that kind of unattainable ideal of self-sufficiency, but really about just every little bit that you can do at home makes a difference. And there's a lot that you can do at home.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. And I was listening to your video for Grow It Local, something in there that you said that 1 in 2 households in Australia are gardeners, backyard gardeners.
Yes.
That's phenomenal.
That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. And that's the people that readily identify as people that grow food. And I think if you wanted to extend it to people that want to, but don't know how to, or feel like they're not supported enough to, or they don't have the knowledge, skills, time, space, then that number would be much closer to 100%. I know it's not for everyone, so it would never be 100%. But
I think there's that like you were talking about right at the start of our conversation, there is that yearning. There's like it's in us. There's that tomato factor, isn't it? When you taste a tomato that's real, when you taste an apple that's real, when you taste real food, you know it. Like you just know it. And I think there is something within us that wants to either find a way to support, access, or grow really good food that's nourishing us and the planet simultaneously. Like what's wrong about that? It's just normal, isn't it? It's just good common sense, and it's more than that. It's appealing.
Yeah, I think that, it's the kind of magic bullet that can fix a lot of the world's problems. And I always challenge people to tell me, I'm like, can you imagine what's a downside of more people growing food? Is there a downside? I mean, can you tell me, like, maybe those wood chips on the side of the road will go quicker because everyone's on the lookout, for organic matter to put in their compost?
I guess it's like when you're growing it in a permaculture way or a local, like, circular system, whatever you call it, yes. Like, but if you're sort of talking about growing food and you're importing a whole lot of stuff, so actually the awareness about, I mean, that could be a bad thing, like if you're using lots of chemicals or whatever. Yes. So, like, that I think is something that it's worth clarifying, that when you start to really just hook into what's around you, growing what works well, nourishing the soil, bringing the system alive, then, it's amplifying abundance, it's amplifying biodiversity, it's addressing climate change, it's addressing your health issues, your mental health, all of those things. And, like you're saying, I can't see anything that sort of is a downside on that either.
Yeah. And so whenever I talk about food growing, of course, I'm talking about the good stuff, more like that home, localized, chemical-free, biodiverse kind of food growing. Definitely not kind of talking about large-scale agriculture and all the, and chemical-based industrial agriculture and the problems that come alongside with that. But, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals get thrown around a lot as a lens through which our society can start to address some of its problems, and urban agriculture in particular addresses directly 15 of them. Mm. You look at, and indirectly the remaining 3, which is just, it's incredible. Like, there is no downside to it when we're talking about that localized, chemical-free variety of kind of food growing. And I think from our kind of hard wiring, it's a survival instinct, because if you had connection to where, through any stage of the human species throughout history, if you had connection to your food supply, if you had connection to the country around you that supplied that food supply, and you had connection to your immediate family, friends, and close community around you, then your chances of survival are pretty high. Mm-hmm. So you're feeling good. If you've got those 3 things tick, 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 you're feeling good. Whereas if any single one of those fell out, for the vast majority of human history, if you're without country, and I'm not talking about like nomadic people moving around because they knew all that country. They were intimate with all the country, no matter what nomadic culture we're talking about. If you didn't have your immediate family and if you didn't have any food, you were stuffed. If one leg of that tripod fell off, you were done. And now we've kind of outsourced all of it. We've got digital communities, we've got supermarkets that provide our food, and we've got our own kind of fenced off, walled up homes that we think of as our country. But when you start to connect more deeply to this, your community, the people around you, the food you eat, then that ancient yearning and satisfaction that comes from a deep and resilient connection to your own life, it's all awoken. Awoken? That's a word, right? Past tense of awaken.
It is now.
Awoken.
There's something about what you just said then. I'm really drawn into this conversation a lot lately, and particularly trying to find the language to express it. I'm finding that I'm lacking in the words that, we can describe it. But how do you describe to someone that deep connection that you have, not just with place, or, we can talk about biophilia, like our connection with nature, like we have a word for that.
Yes.
But the word that connects us with nature, with our food system, that sense of security we get when we know that we're known and belonging in place, and we know where our food's coming from, and like that and I've just come back from Wales, and there's a word there, and it's cynefin. And I also found that there's a word in the Scottish, I'll have to practice how to pronounce that one, but And I'm thinking, my gosh, like we need new language to describe these new things that we're working towards, or the experiences that we're feeling that we don't have the language to talk about.
Because biophilia doesn't go far enough. Because
it's beautiful, but it's not far enough.
Yeah. It's one aspect of this conversation, and it's not taking into account the actual ingestion of what you're doing. You actually, and that's, I remember from Bruce Pascoe's work with Dark Emu, one of the most eloquent pieces that I took away is like, to be of this country, you need to eat this country.
Yeah.
You need to eat the food of your own country. You need to eat, the vegetables that are grown in the soil, the fruit that hangs from the trees, and whether that's, introduced, horticultural type species or wild foods or whatever, like it needs to be from that country on which you live to have a really true and deep connection. And I'm not perfect. We still have to shop at, external to what we grow at home. So I'm not, telling people they need to do this 100%. But really, if we had a look at the whole Australian population and probably the bulk of the Western world, what percentage of people would be eating food of place? It would be microscopic. It would be a fraction of a percent, a fraction of a percent would be eating a diet of where they're from, which is mind-boggling. And I'm in total agreement, Morag, that I'd love to be a part of that conversation, to deepen our language and evolve our language around the importance of that connection to all the things that we've just spoken about. Because, and I know I've kind of mentioned this multiple times, but it's a fundamentally human experience, and a fundamentally living experience, not just, you don't even have to, narrow it down to our own species. So really it's a fundamental of living, to have that connection of what you eat, where you eat it, and who you eat it with.
And I think too, when you're talking about the place, the country, and our relationships, and now we have our little boxes in our backyards, actually realizing that, these places that we steward are actually homes for so many different species. And I think as a gardener, you start to really feel into that. Like I tell the story about how there's this mulberry tree that's here, and now, like, I always thought of like, this is the mulberry tree, and it shades my chickens in the summertime. I get the leaves for making tea, and the mulberries fruit for doing all that. And then one day, this Quail bird arrived. And every year now, for the last 15 years, this Quail bird has been landing in this particular tree, flown in from New Guinea somewhere to this tree. And I'm thinking, yes. Oh my gosh, like, it's not just me and like some bees coming in or some local birds that are here, but it's actually this, my garden is part of this migratory system now, and I'm part of the whole. And I think once we can kind of like tending the local, but it is part of this global caring, this planet care ethic, recognizing that is mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing.
I couldn't agree more, Maura, because I think, sometimes as backyard food growers, we get caught up in our own patch, and it's hard to look over your own fence. But a lot of the work that I do now, I'm a co-founder of a business called Grow It Local, and a big part of what we do is quantifying the impacts of backyard food growers, and this is like amateur, people around the world, or around the country, not yet around the world, but that's certainly where we hope to go. And to the best of our knowledge, it's the biggest year-on-year data set that quantifies the impacts that people have growing food. And we've touched on a lot of these already in that gardening can be this wonderful way to solve the world's problems, but we know that people don't waste food when they garden. It totally changes their reverence for food, that they're individual tenders of biodiversity in their own patch. They're being more conscious with water usage. They're building soil organic carbon. They're building community connection and resilience. They're doing all these amazing things that if you just think of yourself as like, oh, I'm just a backyard gardener, I like it. It's my hobby. It's my happy place. I go out and do it, which is critical to feel that way as well. But when you can zoom out that little bit, and get that bird's eye view and see that there's you and there's 4 other people on your block, and, 20 people in your neighborhood, and 1,000 people in your town, and, tens and hundreds of thousands of people in your nation, millions around the world, then when you take the collective action of each one of those individuals, growing a diverse amount of plant species, growing soil carbon, putting nutrient into the soil, growing locally grown food that is resilient for our health and for our communities, then all of a sudden those numbers are really profound. Like, and in fact, I think of the backyard garden as the most peopled landscape managers on earth, because we often talk about agriculture and the public estate. And the public estate is like, we're so fortunate that we have got these national parks in Australia and around the world. But, if you've got any park rangers in your life, which I know plenty, they're like, mate, we've got to cover hundreds of square kilometers as an individual. There's only so much that we can do, especially in peak camping time, because most of the time we're checking camping fees, which is just a reality of where that management has gone through no fault of theirs. But it's not until, in farms, we look at 10,000 hectares with two farmers and a GPS guided tractor. Whereas you go to the backyard and you go to the urban environment, and whether people are doing it consciously or not, each one is a unique little island of biodiversity. And what I grow in my garden isn't the same as what you grow in your garden. And even if you grow like one of those, every time I go through some random suburban area and see the person with the total rock garden, that's still a habitat. There's still things living in there. There's still lizards and reptiles and little weeds. Or if you're the person that never gardens at all and you've let your whole place go to weed and you never mow, fantastic. It's a paradise. So you can be an unconscious, totally lazy gardener, but you're still contributing to that beautiful tapestry of diversity that makes up the urban environment. And the more that I feel that we can celebrate the role of the home gardener in environmental management, and the more that we can kind of empower them to realize that they're actually making the world a better place, I think that'll encourage and excite more people to join that conversation.
Oh, look, absolutely. And it's phenomenal, really, the difference that it makes to a community, but also difference it makes to yourself as a gardener when you feel that into that possibility and into that, like, I'm doing something that has this global impact, but I'm doing it right locally and helping to nourish my family or my household. There's something that happens inside that then ripples into how you make decisions in your workplace. It ripples into decisions how you might, homeschool your kids, for example, or whatever it is. It sort of myceliates. And I think this is, for me, one of the biggest things is that we often think that change happens by changing the pyramid and changing what's going on at the top. Actually, this change that's rippling out at this level is doing all of those things you're talking about, like addressing mental health and biodiversity, soil carbon, climate, food waste, like all these different things right down here at this sort of almost unseen level. Yes. Because it's sort of quite often marginalized as not being something that's really that important as part of policy making or anything else. And I want to just talk about that a little bit, because is there anything in the work that you're doing making those leaps and connections with helping to shift the kind of support that home gardeners are getting from local government, say, perhaps?
Yes, so I think local government, I think all levels of government can appreciate the benefit of home food growing. Certainly at the federal level, probably not so much because they're dealing with that national export agriculture picture, but definitely at the state and local level, which is where historically we've been working with Grow It Local. And to give you an example, we know that once people start their gardening journey, and I mentioned this earlier, once people start their gardening journey, that they start to look at organic waste in a totally different light. They start to compost, they start to worm farm. And we know that, pretty much all people that grow food have some sort of organic waste diversion strategy. And for government, that is like manna from the gods, because it's such an enormous problem. The UN's got an international treaty on the minimization or the reduction of waste by 2030 by 50%. The federal government's a signatory to that. All state governments are signatories to that. And it just goes handball down to the local governments. And there's only so much that you can do from the policy end without actually addressing behavior change. And we've found that the most powerful behavior change is for people to start growing. It's not to give them an extra bin and tell them what they can and can't put in there, because that is like, yes, it's great in many instances. FOGO is much better than putting it into landfill, but it's still people outsourcing the responsibility of the management of their own organic waste. But once you become a gardener, you realize how precious that is. You realize how much your garden benefits from your own compost or worm castings or bokashi. And you stop seeing it as something that you scrape in the bin and you go, oh my God, this is too precious. So with Grow It Local, we run
And
a
you
lot of
start
support and
asking
workshops.
people to give it to you as well, don't you?
Oh yeah, of
Can
course.
I have your waste,
Oh,
please?
Morag. Oh, it's so good, especially when like you go to maybe someone that lives in a bit more of a built-up environment, doesn't have a garden, and you go for a nice dinner party and they start scraping everything into the bin. You're like, whoa, 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 whoa! I'll take a. You got a doggy bag for me there? I'll take that. I bought my own compost bucket just to. And we're one of those houses that got like 3 different, kitchen compost buckets. There's the chook bin, the compost bin, and the worm bin, and all like the kids know what goes in what, and we try really hard to get the most out of whatever becomes scrap. So definitely that for me is being able to. That's just one example of how what the work that we do with Grow It Local and the work that I do can work with government as well, because I think it's essential to engage government in the conversation, because people may call me naive or foolish for this, but I think at the end of the day, they want people to be, they want a positive outcome. And there's no point. I don't think there's any point in going, well, I'm going to do everything external to government, and they're not going to have any say in my life. But rather proactively engaging them and saying, well, we can make this behavior change happen. You want that behavior change to happen, so how can we collaborate?
Yeah, absolutely. That's sort of something that I've been trying to do through the community garden movement ever since I began with that too. It's like, you start it, then you're in the conversation all the time. I think it has to be a constant dialogue, because we can support each other in that way, from community to government, and to have a lot of partnerships going on in that space all the time.
Critical.
But I really want to hear more about Grow It Local. So tell, what is it doing, how to get started, and where's it going right now? Because there's rumbles of some exciting stuff happening.
So Grow It Local's been running in its current form for the last 3 years, and at its core, it's a gardening education platform. So it's a digital platform that, through a series of free workshops, through people such as your good self, Morag, you've been one of our amazing contributors, which people have thoroughly enjoyed your workshops, but really workshops from the kind of who's who of people that know how to grow food in Australia, and having them readily accessible to people, having them tailored for different climates, so people can access where they're growing food or how it's grown in their certain environment, as well as building a community and quantifying the impacts of that community. So over the last couple of years, we've managed to grow our community to around 30,000 plus people. And we know that those people are cultivating over 1 million square meters of vegetable garden, which is a lot. That's something like 50 MCGs, to put it in like that's a lot of, and that's a fraction of the Australian food growing population. That's just what we know from our membership. And we know that that community is also they're diverting 42,000 kilograms of food from landfill every single week. So they're living happier lives, they're living healthier lives. So we want to encourage more people to grow food, and Grow It Local is all about supporting people throughout that whole journey, whether it's patch to plate, kind of grow alongs where we send out a curated selection of seeds and people have a content journey that's specifically tailored to those 3 varieties of seeds, and teaming up with amazing chefs to then cook recipes with the stuff that they grow. Up until this point, we've been mainly a business to government entity, where we work with local and state governments to deliver more food growers, or to create an environment where more people are learning to grow food. But we've just started to look at like a more direct to the public type approach. And we've realized that the impact report is something that people are really interested in. So really that's always been back facing, but that has just come out in the last couple of weeks. So you can have a look at the full report on our website, growitlocal.com, to get an idea of what the impact that food growers are having. And as a part of our growth as a profit for purpose business, is we're actually opening up the business to community investment, because what we've done has always been driven by our community of growers. We've always listened to what they want and to what they, need to feel more supported, to have some homegrown success. So we've just done what's called a community investment round. It's still live at the moment. So if you're listening to this, you can still become a co-owner of Grow It Local. And it's kind of like crowdfunding, but with a stake in a business. So rather than, looking to drive business growth by looking for some private investment from, some sort of venture capital background or something like that, that's not really our style. We thought, well, we've got this incredible community of people that are really engaged. So why not give them the opportunity to become co-owners of the business? And then we can drive this change together, and people can feel empowered as owners of the businesses and food growers to be able to, make this world a better place, because we feel like there's a real appetite in this digital age for people to have real life hands in the dirt experiences. And we found that a lot of innovation in the contemporary gardening space is about taking people out of the gardens, where it's about, kind of push button tabletop hydroponic systems where you just press a button and then 3 weeks later you got a tomato. Whereas what we want to do is use technology as a way to educate and empower people and to connect them. But then really at the heart of it, it's people out in their own gardens, and they're just using Grow It Local as an adjunct to their knowledge and skills.
Yeah, fantastic. I think you're absolutely right. And just as much as we can get our hands in the soil and activate the soil life and the soil ecology and really focusing on that lifing, it's so important. So you're inviting people to come and be part of your business, basically, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. You can become a shareholder in Grow It Local. So that's we're just kind of coming towards the tail end of that opportunity now. It's only a window. Obviously, you can't just leave that kind of stuff open indefinitely, because it takes a lot of management to bring people into a business as shareholders. But if you're listening to this, there's still opportunity. You can head over to our website, growitlocal.com, and learn all about it there. There's plenty of information on about it. And of course, it's all registered through a legitimate body that does this kind of stuff. We're not just, kind of cowboy operators. Like, it's through an actual investment platform that we're doing this. And yeah, we'd basically love people to join what we're doing, because we know that backyard food growers are passionate and are looking for ways to kind of invest their money in a way that makes a positive difference in the world. And you couldn't ask for a more polar opposite than investing in something like Grow It Local, as opposed to primary resources or pharmaceuticals or banking or anything.
Yeah, that's right. So what's your goal? How much are you trying to raise, and what are you going to do with that fund?
So the goal is currently, and this is kind of something that we've thought about, but it's kind of a nominal figure as well. We're aiming to raise $1 million basically in investment, and what that will enable us to do is to be able to really tailor our platform to be able to more personalize people's education journeys. So people will be able to have a much the platform will be able to figure out your circumstances much better and give you personalized recommendations on your growing journey. And also, as a part of that, to be able to, we've got a subscription product, which is where the grow along journeys exist. But we kind of imagine a world where when you buy seeds, they're education enabled, and you have that opportunity to, when you buy a packet of seeds, learn from that packet of seeds how to grow that plant every step of the way, and then have a full catalog of recipes and cuisines that you can either build up towards or reverse engineer, and basically just to make sure that if you want to grow food and you want to cook food and you want to connect with community, instead of trying to trawl through YouTube or trying to learn through, just osmosis or the long, hard way, that there is educational support for you there every step of the way. And we don't really know of anyone else doing this around the world. So a part of that investment opportunity is for us to be able to take this to other foreign markets, and see that, that success replicated as well. And not in a way that we're trying to totally transplant what we do here in Australia. But the great thing about being a community-driven business like Grow It Local is that really we're a reflection of our community. And if we were to go overseas, then the offering overseas would be driven by a foreign community as well.
It's amazing. So I'm going to put all the links to all of those down below. And also there's a fantastic video there as well where you're planted in the soil. Yeah, that's so funny.
Just a bit of fun. Yeah. If you listen
to
this,
ideas like that, I keep thinking we got to be funnier. I'm just so not funny, I tell my kids. And they say, no, you're right, Mum.
Yeah, you're right, Mum. I don't agree with much you say, Mum, but that I'll agree with.
Yes. Actually having a bit of fun with it. I think that's really,
Well, I think that's the best way. And I've kind of been skirting around that notion the whole time in this conversation, Morag, that the last way to encourage people, because we spend a lot of time speaking to the converted, right, in this world. But the last way to engage people that aren't yet in this world is to stand on a soapbox and wag your finger at them and tell them you should be doing this and you should be doing that. But to make our lifestyle fun and celebratory and inclusive, and rather than telling them they should be doing it, just bringing people along for the ride. And eventually the penny will drop for them and they'll be like, oh, this is fantastic. I want to do it myself.
Yeah. And it is. It's real. It feels good, doesn't it? Like
it feels good.
It feels good. Yeah. And it feels like, you're actually able to do something really meaningful and positive and able to give back, like it's all of that wrapped up into it. And I think there's something about that touches on aspects of our lives that like we know are missing. It seems like it's ridiculous that it's that simple to address, but actually get out in the garden can help us. Yeah.
And I think earlier we were talking about the power of gardening, and for me it's when you're looking at all the stuff that's going wrong in the world, it's easy to fall into a state of despair. But when you start growing, you flick that switch from despair to hope, because growing food is in essence an act of hope. You don't plant a seed and be cynical that it's not going to grow. You're planting it in an act of hope that it'll sprout and it'll come up and you'll get to enjoy the fruits of that labor.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Paul. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, and it's nice to meet you too there in the background.
That's Bowie.
Hi, Bowie.
6-year-old Bowie. He's letting me know he's bored.
Well, I appreciate that, Bowie, because I've taken your dad from you for a long time, and I also appreciate what it's like to be a homeschooling parent too. So, yeah, thank you very much for joining me today. And for the listeners out there, check out the links below for where to find out all about Grow It Local. And if you're listening to this during Urban Agriculture Month, then happy Urban Agriculture Month to you, and check out the resources for the Grow It Local campaign. Well, thank you again, and all the best with that.
Morag, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Sense Making the Changing World. Check out the show notes below to find the links to Grow It Local and all the things that Paul West was mentioning. And also check out the notes for where you can find details of our permaculture courses, our YouTube blog, free masterclasses and film clubs, and make sure you're signed up to hear news and updates. And come and join us at the Permaculture Education Institute to learn practical skills for designing and teaching permaculture and making a good livelihood while living a permaculture-inspired one planet way of life. Take care. I look forward to your company next time.